The storm arrives on a Tuesday night, silent and heavy, turning highway shoulders into white walls. Plows are already rolling before the first sedan slides off the ramp. By morning, someone will invoice the state for 200 hours that never happened, and no one will check the GPS. If you love stories about corruption hidden in plain sight, about emergency powers that become permanent profit machines, and about the moment a snow shovel becomes a weapon of fraud, make sure to follow, because this one ends with federal agents arresting contractors in 3 states while the plows keep running. Richmond, Virginia, January 2016. The temperature is 18 degrees. Snow is forecast to start within the hour. Inside a windowless conference room at a Virginia Department of Transportation maintenance facility, a district supervisor named Michael Miller sits across from a contractor whose company name is printed on magnetic door signs stacked beside a toolbox. The contractor slides an envelope under a pile of bid documents. Miller does not open it. He does not need to. They have done this 4 times before. The envelope contains $1,500 in cash. In exchange, Miller will make sure the contractor's company is awarded the next snow removal route along Interstate 64 between Richmond and Williamsburg. The route is worth $80,000 for the season. The contractor will bill for sand and salt he never bought, for overtime his crew never worked, and for equipment he does not own. Miller will approve every invoice without question. This arrangement has been running since 2013. It will continue until a federal prosecutor reads an email Miller should have deleted. Snow removal in the United States is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Most of it is honest. Crews work overnight shifts in sub-zero wind. Drivers stay awake on black ice and coffee. Municipalities depend on them to keep roads passable, hospitals accessible, and commerce moving. But the system that funds this work is built on emergency exceptions. When snow falls, procurement rules bend. Bidding timelines shrink. Oversight fades. Contracts are awarded on the basis of availability, not competition. Payment is often based on reported hours and material use, verified only by the contractor's own logs. In a normal year, this trust works. In a corrupt year, it becomes a machine. The structure is simple. A state or county transportation department maintains a list of pre-approved snow removal contractors. When a storm approaches, officials activate the list and assign routes. Contractors mobilize equipment, plow the roads, submit invoices, and receive payment within weeks. The entire cycle repeats dozens of times each winter. Oversight is minimal because time is short and the work is considered essential. This is where the gap opens. If a contractor inflates the number of trucks deployed, no one counts them in the storm. If he reports 30 hours of plowing on a road that needed 10, no one drives the route with a stopwatch. If he bills for 12 tons of salt but only spread 6, no one weighs the stockpile. The invoices are approved by the same supervisors who awarded the contracts. And if those supervisors are receiving cash, gift cards, or promises of future employment, they have no reason to ask hard questions. The fraud is invisible until someone starts comparing invoices to GPS logs, fuel receipts, and weather data. That someone is usually a federal agent. Michael Miller's scheme at the Virginia Department of Transportation began modestly. A contractor he had worked with for years offered to pay for his family's vacation. Miller accepted. The next winter, the same contractor asked for preferential treatment on a bid. Miller provided it. The relationship deepened. Soon, Miller was receiving regular cash payments, sometimes in person, sometimes left in his truck. He steered contracts to 3 different companies, all of whom inflated their hours and material costs. Between 2013 and 2017, Miller approved fraudulent invoices totaling more than $400,000. The contractors kept roughly 60%. Miller received approximately $50,000 in bribes. The fraud was exposed when a junior transportation analyst noticed that one contractor's fuel purchases did not match the mileage and hours he was billing. The analyst reported the discrepancy to an internal auditor. The auditor flagged it to the State Inspector General. The Inspector General referred it to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Within 6 months, agents were reviewing Miller's emails, bank deposits, and text messages. They found records of cash pickups, instructions to backdate timesheets, and a spreadsheet tracking which invoices had been approved and which were pending. In March 2018, Miller pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit honest services wire fraud. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. The contractors involved received similar sentences. The case was prosecuted by the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia. The Virginia case was not an anomaly. It was a pattern. Less than a year later, federal prosecutors in Alaska charged a facilities manager at the Anchorage Veterans Affairs Hospital with accepting bribes from a snow removal contractor. The manager's name was Richard Plummer. His role was to oversee maintenance contracts for the hospital campus, including snow plowing, landscaping, and waste removal. Plummer had worked for the VA for more than 15 years. He was trusted. He had signing authority on contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he was taking money from a contractor who wanted to keep his monopoly on the hospital's winter work. The contractor was a local operator who had been plowing the VA hospital's parking lots and access roads since 2010. His bids were never the lowest, but Plummer always recommended him. When other contractors submitted competitive bids, Plummer found reasons to disqualify them. He cited equipment concerns, insurance gaps, or vague performance issues. The preferred contractor always won. In exchange, he paid Plummer in cash, meals, home repairs, and discounted services for Plummer's rental properties. Over 5 years, Plummer received approximately $30,000 in bribes. The contractor inflated his invoices by billing for extra hours, phantom materials, and emergency call-outs that never occurred. He once billed the VA for clearing snow during a week when no snow had fallen. The invoice was approved. The fraud unraveled when a whistleblower inside the hospital's facilities department reported the contractor's repeated wins and Plummer's close relationship with him. The Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General opened an investigation. Agents reviewed contract files, bid histories, and Plummer's financial records. They found that Plummer had received payments from the contractor within days of awarding new contracts. They also discovered that Plummer had used his government email to coordinate with the contractor on how to structure bids to avoid scrutiny. In August 2019, Plummer pleaded guilty to accepting bribes in connection with a federal program. He was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to forfeit the bribe money. The contractor was charged separately. The case was covered by Alaska public media and referenced in VA Inspector General reports as an example of procurement corruption in regional medical facilities. The Alaska case differed from Virginia in one key respect. In Virginia, the fraud involved state funds and state employees. In Alaska, it involved federal funds and a federal employee, but the mechanics were identical. A facilities manager with authority to award contracts, a contractor willing to pay for access, a system that relied on trust instead of verification, and a fraud scheme that survived for years because no one was watching closely enough. 2025. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Federal agents arrest a snow removal company owner named David Raupach. The charges include wire fraud and money laundering. The scheme involves inflated invoices, falsified work logs, and a conspiracy to defraud both public and private clients over more than a decade. Raupach operated a mid-sized snow removal and landscaping business that held contracts with municipalities, shopping centers, and commercial properties across western Pennsylvania. His company had a reputation for reliability. Clients trusted him to keep their parking lots clear and their roads safe. But behind the billing statements and signed contracts, Raupach was running a fraud operation that generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in false payments. The method was systematic. Raupach would submit invoices for snow removal work that his crews had not performed. He billed for full plowing and salting of large lots, when his trucks had only cleared a fraction of the area. He claimed overtime hours for workers who had gone home early. He inflated the tonnage of salt spread by listing bulk deliveries that never occurred. To cover the discrepancies, he altered GPS logs from his trucks, backdated employee time cards, and created fake purchase orders for materials. He also maintained 2 sets of books. One showed actual costs and hours. The other showed inflated figures that matched the fraudulent invoices. Clients received the inflated version. His accountant saw the real one. The fraud extended beyond snow removal. Raupach used the same tactics for landscaping and maintenance contracts during the summer months. He billed municipalities for mowing and trimming work his crews had skipped. He charged for mulch and topsoil that was never delivered. He submitted invoices for emergency storm cleanup that included hours worked on sunny days. The scheme was lucrative because his clients, especially municipal governments, rarely audited the work. They trusted the invoices because Raupach had been in business for years and his trucks showed up when called. But federal investigators began to notice patterns. Invoice amounts were consistently high relative to weather data. Fuel purchases did not align with reported mileage. Employee payroll records did not match the hours billed to clients. In 2023, the FBI opened a criminal investigation. Agents interviewed former employees, reviewed bank records, and obtained search warrants for Raupach's business computers. They found spreadsheets, emails, and internal communications that laid out the fraud in detail. In January 2025, Raupach was indicted by a federal grand jury. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud and money laundering. Sentencing is scheduled for later in the year. The case was prosecuted by the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of Pennsylvania. The Pittsburgh case is different from Virginia and Alaska in scale and sophistication. Raupach was not paying bribes to government officials. He was defrauding the clients directly. His scheme did not rely on corrupt insiders. It relied on the assumption that no one would check his work. And for more than 10 years, that assumption was correct. He billed, clients paid, and the cycle repeated. The fraud only stopped when someone finally looked at the numbers and saw that they did not make sense. These 3 cases share a common thread. They exploit the emergency nature of snow removal. When a storm is coming, decisions are made quickly. Contracts are awarded without competitive bidding. Invoices are approved without verification. The assumption is that everyone is acting in good faith because the work is urgent and necessary. But that assumption creates opportunity. Contractors can inflate hours because no one is tracking them in real time. Supervisors can steer contracts because no one is reviewing the selection process. Materials can be billed twice because no one is auditing the stockpiles. The fraud is invisible until an investigator asks why the numbers do not match the weather. The legal framework is clear. Federal wire fraud statutes prohibit schemes to defraud using electronic communications. Honest services fraud statutes prohibit government employees from accepting bribes or kickbacks in exchange for official actions. Money laundering statutes prohibit the concealment of proceeds from illegal activity. Prosecutors use these tools to dismantle snow removal fraud schemes the same way they target corruption in construction, healthcare, and defense contracting. The difference is visibility. A fraudulent defense contract might involve classified technology and complex supply chains. A fraudulent snow removal contract involves trucks, salt, and timesheets. It should be easier to detect, but it often is not. The consequences extend beyond the individual cases. When contractors defraud municipalities, taxpayers pay more for less service. Roads are left unplowed because crews were never dispatched. Salt stockpiles run low because funds were diverted to fraudulent invoices. Trust erodes between governments and contractors. Honest companies lose bids to fraudulent competitors who can underbid them because they plan to inflate costs later. The entire system becomes less efficient and more expensive. Reform efforts focus on verification. Some states now require GPS tracking on all snow removal vehicles. Invoices are cross-referenced with GPS data to confirm that trucks were actually on the assigned routes. Fuel purchases are compared to reported hours to detect discrepancies. Weather data is used to validate the timing and duration of plowing operations. Random audits are conducted during and after each storm season. Contractors are required to submit detailed logs, including driver names, equipment serial numbers, and material delivery receipts. Supervisors who approve invoices are required to certify that they have reviewed supporting documentation. In some jurisdictions, contracts now include fraud detection clauses that allow auditors to access contractor records without notice. These measures are not universal. Many counties and municipalities still rely on trust and self-reporting. But the trend is toward transparency and accountability. The cases in Virginia, Alaska, and Pennsylvania are documented. Court filings, plea agreements, and sentencing memoranda are public record. The Virginia case is detailed in documents filed in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. The Alaska case is covered in reports by the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General and in articles published by Alaska Public Media. The Pittsburgh case is documented in filings with the United States District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. All three cases were prosecuted under federal statutes because the fraud involved either federal funds, federal employees, or interstate commerce. State prosecutors could have charged the defendants under state fraud statutes, but federal penalties are generally harsher, and federal agencies have more resources for complex financial investigations. The fraud does not require sophistication. It requires opportunity and a willingness to take it. Michael Miller did not need a computer science degree to accept cash in exchange for steering contracts. Richard Plummer did not need an accounting background to approve fraudulent invoices. David Raupach did not need a criminal network to inflate his bills. They needed access, authority, and the belief that no one was watching. For years, that belief was justified. The fraud continued because oversight was weak, audits were rare, and clients trusted the invoices they received. It only stopped when someone asked a simple question: why does this number not match that number? Once that question was asked, the fraud unraveled quickly. Winter is an emergency. Roads must be cleared. Hospitals must be accessible. Commerce must continue. The contractors who do this work are essential. Most of them are honest. They wake up at 3 in the morning, drive through blizzards, and work until the roads are safe. They do not inflate their hours. They do not steal salt. They do not bribe officials, but the system that pays them is vulnerable. It relies on speed, trust, and minimal oversight. When someone decides to exploit that vulnerability, the fraud can run for years before anyone notices. The cases in Virginia, Alaska, and Pennsylvania prove that. They also prove that when investigators finally look, the fraud is easy to find. It is hiding in plain sight, buried in invoices that no one bothered to check. The aftermath is financial and legal. Miller, Plummer, and Raupach lost their freedom, their reputations, and their assets. The contractors who paid bribes lost their businesses and faced criminal penalties. The government entities involved reformed their procurement processes, increased oversight, and implemented new audit procedures. But the damage was already done. Taxpayers had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for work that was never performed or materials that were never delivered. Trust in public contracting was eroded, and the next snowstorm still requires the same emergency response, the same quick decisions, and the same reliance on contractors who promise to do the work. The lesson is not that snow removal is corrupt. It is that any system built on emergency exceptions and minimal oversight can be corrupted if someone is willing to try. The fraud in Virginia, Alaska, and Pennsylvania was not sophisticated. It was opportunistic. The perpetrators saw a gap and filled it. They inflated hours, falsified logs, and pocketed the difference. They did it because they could, and they kept doing it until someone asked the right question. The image that remains is not of a snowplow clearing a highway in the dead of night. It is of an invoice sitting on a desk, approved with a signature, paid with public funds, and never questioned. That invoice is the crime scene. The plough was just the cover.